Hello everyone, my name is Lyra, and if anyone heard my story, they would probably think it was a fictional story, a tragedy that could never happen in real life. But everything I am about to tell is true, and it has completely changed my life in ways I could never have imagined. My life started very normally, like thousands of other women in London. I am a nurse, working in a care center for the elderly. My job is not too stressful but requires meticulousness and dedication. Every day I go to work with joy and a sense of fulfillment because I am taking care of people who need me. The center where I work is located in a quiet area of London, among the green trees and small roads leading into the city. I have been attached to this place for many years, gradually considering it my second home. As for my family, I am married to a wonderful man. He is a doctor, dedicated to his profession, and always loves me. After getting married, we did not live separately but lived with his family in a large house in a high-class residential area in London. That house was always bustling and full of laughter. Living with us were my husband's parents, old but always gentle and thoughtful. My brother-in-law, Keaton, also lived with the family. He was in college, a young, dynamic, and always full of life. My brother-in-law was still in high school. The whole family loved her because of her gentle and obedient personality. Day by day, life went on as usual, as if nothing could disrupt it. Every morning, my husband went to work early. I prepared breakfast for the whole family and then went to the center. In the evening, we gathered together for warm meals with jokes and stories. The whole family often watched movies together, talked, and enjoyed a moment of peace amidst the hustle and bustle of life outside. I thought my life would always be like this, happy, peaceful, and without any incident. But deep inside, a change was silently taking place without my realizing it. Everything familiar, from the house, family, to myself, was gradually changing, being pushed into a situation I could not have expected. There was no warning of the storm that was coming, and when it did, it would sweep away everything I had believed to be stable. But then one day, everything that seemed solid began to change, gently and silently, as if everything was slowly crumbling without my knowledge. I didn't realize that my life had taken a dangerous turn. That day, the usually crowded house became strangely deserted. My husband's parents had gone on a long trip to Australia that they had planned in advance. My sister-in-law was still busy with her studies, leaving home early as usual. As for my husband, he had a night shift at the hospital, leaving me and my brother-in-law Keaton at home. The whole big house was quiet, no more laughter or familiar chatter. I remember that at around 6 p.m. I had finished showering and stepped out wearing a short skirt, an everyday outfit I often wore around the house. I never thought that it could be the source of anything unusual. It was just a familiar, convenient choice, nothing special. I didn't feel any uneasiness at that moment, no premonition that things were about to change. Keaton was still downstairs, probably watching TV or doing his own thing. I walked down to the kitchen, preparing to cook dinner, like always. Time passed in a strange peace. However, I had no idea that the silence was hiding something I would never forget. While I was cooking dinner, I was only focused on the cooking, the rhythmic sound of knives and chopping boards, the aroma of food filling the kitchen. But then, suddenly I felt a strange hand slip around my waist, squeezing gently but firmly. A body pressed against me from behind, hot breath blowing on my neck, making me startled. At that moment, I froze, my body as if blocked by a cold wind sweeping past. I turned around and my eyes met Keaton's. His face was no longer the face of the cheerful, innocent brother-in-law I had known. Instead, there was something different, an uncontrollable hunger in his eyes. Before I could say anything, he hugged me tightly, Keaton's hard arms like shackles strangling my body. "Sister-in-law, I like you." His voice was soft, but full of determination, a sound that made every cell in my body tremble. Before I could react, his lips touched me, strong and rough, not a tender kiss, but a possession. I was startled, trying to push him away, but my body was small and weak before the strength of a 22-year-old man. Keaton tightened his grip. Every muscle in his arm seemed to suffocate me. I struggled, but all my efforts were in vain. His hand did not stop there. It began to slide down, groping all over my body roughly and hastily. Every feeling in me was mixed between fear and despair. I wanted to scream, wanted to call my husband's name, but my voice was choked, unable to make a sound. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it was about to burst out of my chest. I felt like I was sinking deep into a nightmare that I could not wake up from. And then, before I could do anything more, Keaton crossed all boundaries. His invasion was so sudden that I had no ability to resist. My body was locked in Keaton's arms, no longer mine. Each passing moment was like a knife cutting deep into my soul. Little by little, I lost everything: peace, control, and most of all, myself. After finishing, Keaton left, leaving me alone in the kitchen, in a space that was once familiar and peaceful, but now suffocating and gloomy. I stood there, my legs shaking as if unable to hold my body. A feeling of dizziness and numbness filled every vein, every breath. My hands trembled, all my strength seemed to be drained. Everything around me suddenly became strange. The familiar kitchen, where I used to cook happy meals for my family, was now like a narrow, cold cage, trapping me inside. I collapsed, my back against the kitchen cabinet. Tears began to flow, each heavy drop rolling down my cheeks. I couldn't understand myself, couldn't understand what had just happened. Everything had happened so fast, so unexpectedly, that I couldn't react or even clearly understand what was happening. Why me? What did I do wrong? Why did everything suddenly fall apart like this? The questions kept drilling into my mind, like invisible knives constantly stabbing my already broken heart. But I couldn't find the answers. My mind was empty, only confusion and despair remained. Everything I had believed in, everything I thought I had, suddenly disappeared. I thought of my husband, whom I loved and respected. I wanted to tell him, to confess everything, to tell him what had happened. But immediately, a greater fear than anything else invaded my mind. The fear that if he knew, things would never be the same again, that the family we had built would be shattered, that he would never look at me with the same loving eyes, that he would abandon me and I would lose everything. I couldn't face that prospect. The fear of judgment, the fear of losing everything, choked me. In the end, I decided to keep quiet. I told myself that maybe, if I didn't say anything, if I kept it all inside, things would go on as before. But deep down, I knew that wasn't possible anymore. For the next few days, I tried to act as if everything was normal. I told myself that if I could just stay calm, life would go back to normal, as if it had never happened. I worked harder, busying myself with household chores to keep my mind off of it. But no matter what, I couldn't shake the guilt and fear that was lurking in my mind. Then another day came, and the house was as quiet as before. Everyone was out, my husband was busy with a long shift at the hospital, and his sister was at school. I thought that maybe I would have a quiet day, simply doing some chores around the house. Keaton, as usual, was home. At that moment, he walked up to me in the kitchen and handed me a glass of orange juice. I didn't think anything of it, just thanked him and drank it out of habit. But soon, I started to feel something was different. My body was burning up, waves of heat spreading throughout my body, and a strange feeling began to take over. I felt confused, unable to control my thoughts. In my confusion, I rushed to my room, hoping that I could restrain myself, control myself. But as soon as I stepped through the door, Keaton followed me in. He hugged me tightly from behind, his body pressed against mine, strong and hungry. I knew I had to resist, to push him away, but all my strength seemed to be swept away by the frenzy of emotions. In my panic and loss of control, I felt myself respond with intensity. My actions were no longer driven by reason, but by a deep, inexplicable desire. My body responded to what was happening, and we crossed the line once again, right in my husband and I's bedroom. This time, unlike before, I felt something different. An irresistible pleasure swept over me, pulling me deeper into a state of ecstasy I had never experienced before. I felt trapped between guilt and pleasure, unable to escape. Keaton and I, once again, broke all boundaries of right and wrong. and it happened right in the most sacred place of my marriage, my husband and I's bedroom. This second time was no longer a passing mistake. It was far beyond the line, not just a temporary deviation, but a deep wound in my heart. I couldn't continue living in the cycle of guilt, and tension that had engulfed my soul. Every day, I felt like I was carrying a secret so heavy that it could burst at any moment. I knew that if I stayed in that house, I would never be able to escape Keaton, never be able to erase what had happened. And the worst part was, every time I looked into my husband's eyes, I felt like I was betraying him, even though he didn't know it. So I convinced him that we needed some space, that we needed to move out to start over, to build a new life without the pressures of family. My husband, without doubt, agreed. He believed that this was the right decision for our marriage, so that we could both build a home in our own way. Soon after, we moved out of that house, leaving behind everything I wanted to forget. We rented another house in the city, a place far away from everything that had happened. I hoped that in this new space I would find peace, that the past could be buried there, and I could start over. But as time passed, I realized that the past was not as easy to let go as I had hoped. Even though Keaton had moved away from the old house, he had also started a family and a life of his own, but that did not change his presence in my mind. Whenever we ran into each other at family gatherings, there was something indescribable in his eyes, a silent reminder of what had happened. It made me flinch, stirring up an insecurity in me that I tried to hide, but could never truly extinguish. The feeling of guilt haunts me, relentless. Every day, I live in fear that one day, the truth will be revealed, that I will lose everything. I love my husband. I love the family we built together. We have a little daughter, lovely and the greatest happiness of my life. From the outside, my life seems perfect. But inside, the dark secrets that I try to bury are like wounds that never heal, aching every moment. There are nights when everything around is quiet. I stand in front of the mirror, look at myself, and wonder if I can ever forget it all. The past clings to me like an inseparable part of me. I wonder if I will ever be forgiven, not only by my husband, but by myself. But then I told myself, perhaps no forgiveness is big enough to completely erase what happened. I have blamed myself many times, tormented myself for letting things happen like that. In moments of deep thought, I always wondered if it was because my way of dressing was too sexy, too revealing that Keaton could not control himself. Maybe if I had dressed more modestly, more carefully, kept a clear distance, things would not have gone this far. I used to think that it was those little things that led to the tragedy I suffered, that I was partly to blame. But over time, I also realized that it was not all that simple. Sometimes the erosion does not come from big events or turning points, but from the little things in everyday life. Looks, gestures, seemingly harmless words all gradually change relationships, break boundaries without us realizing it until it is too late. And then, looking back, I understand that the fault is not just what I did or did not do. It is a series of things that neither of us can control, moments that I was not strong enough to stop. I can only advise that, if you are ever in a similar situation, be careful, pay attention to the little things around you. Don't let things slide to the point of no return. I tell this story not to seek sympathy or forgiveness from anyone. I understand that, after hearing my story, many people will criticize, even condemn me. But I accept that because I do not take it to heart. My only purpose is to turn my story into a lesson for myself and for those who can hear. I chose to stay silent, chose to hide everything because of fear, because of worrying about my family's happiness. And now I realize that it could be the biggest mistake of my life. There are things that should never happen, and there are boundaries that should never be crossed. I hope that through my story, I can remind everyone to be strong in the face of unusual things, not to let fear make you silent like I did. Perhaps, after all, I have decided to keep this story in my heart forever. I can't change what happened, and telling the truth might destroy everything I'm trying to protect. Despite the torment and guilt, I still choose to keep silent. Not because I want to avoid responsibility, but because I'm afraid that if the truth is exposed, I will lose my family, lose the husband I love. and perhaps lose myself. Keeping silent is the only way I know to protect what's left of this life, even though deep down, I know that this wound will never truly heal. But perhaps if I bury it deep enough, I can continue to live with my small family, with the girl I love so much, without letting this dark past destroy everything. Thank you everyone for listening to my story. Although I cannot change the past, sharing it in the hope that what I experience will become a lesson for someone has helped me feel a little lighter. Perhaps each of us has stories that are not easy to tell, but I hope that my story will help those who listen to understand that silence is sometimes the heaviest burden we have to bear. Once again, thank you for listening and understanding.